hashtag Opinion Court so that we can track your feedback. I'm going to reintroduce my guests to you, and this evening we're focusing on the current affairs of the week. To my immediate right, Dr. Nelson Makanda. He's the Deputy General Secretary of the National Council of Churches of Kenya. Next to him is Kamodho Waiganjo. He's a former commissioner at the now defunct Commission for the Implementation of the Constitution. Next to him is Barak Muluka, who last we left was a political analyst, but now is the ANC Secretary General, newly anointed.
Wow.
Well, congratulations to you.
Wow.
Goodness.
After this.
Yes,
you know.
indeed. You're welcome.
There's a political party's fund.
It's not,
okay.
It's not meant for
and
that.
Edward Kisiangani, I certainly hope you haven't changed your title. He's our resident political analyst, and you're all welcome to the program.
Was Barak elected?
Oh dear.
No.
Oh dear.
There was no for section 34A.
Let's not go there.
There's no verification. It's null and void.
Okay.
Barak is a friend
Open
of the
the
show. I'll
summer.
save you that one.
He's trying to go below the belt, but I will find him.
You will find him. All right, gentlemen. So we've got some serious matters to discuss. It's been quite a week of political intrigues, and I'm going to start with you, Barak, now that you're a player proper in the political field, given all the developments, the resignation of Commissioner Akombe, the threats from the chairman, Wafula Chebukati, who sounds like he's considering quitting, and almost in the same way looked, many would argue, rather defeated in his last presser. The protests we've been seeing, the disruption of IEBC's preparations for the polls. Do you think we can go to a legitimate election next Thursday?
The straight answer is actually no, we can't. You see, we had an election on the 8th of August this year. The election process, as the voting exercise went on very well. At least everybody acknowledged that. And then we got to the subsequent processes, and things just seem to have collapsed, especially with regard to the presidential election. And so when the matters went to court, and without going into any detail, the Supreme Court determined that there had been irregularities and illegalities, on the basis of which it invalidated the presidential election result as was announced by the IEBC, and directed that a new, fresh election should be conducted in strict adherence to the Constitution, the electoral laws, and the regulations. Now, we have seen insiders saying that they are not comfortable. There is an African saying. It says that if the alligator comes from the sea and says that a crocodile is sick, then crocodile must be sick. So we have had two alligators, Akombe, Chebukati, coming from the sea, saying that crocodile is sick. So crocodile, the crocodile that is called the IBC, is unwell. And we need to come to terms with that reality. You can also look at the...
On 26th, with the existing climate, would it bring any legitimacy questions?
I think we need to separate legitimacy from legality, because legitimacy is a political question, and I think it's impossible to resolve. I think let's deal first with the legal issues. Here is the reality. We are a constitutional and legal democracy. The reason why we went for elections on the 8th of August is because the Constitution demanded it. The reason why we set up an electoral commission is because the Constitution demands it. The reason why we went to court and allowed the Supreme Court to make a determination on a political and legal question was because the Constitution demands it. The court, pursuant to that Constitution, has made some orders. Those orders include the fact that the elections need to be held within a particular timeline. That decision also requires that the institution called the IBC manages that election. The courts thereafter have defined what a fresh election is. So there are subsisting court orders, there are subsisting constitutional provisions, and until those provisions are either amended or that court decision is vacated, we have a constitutional imperative to hold an election. And I think we need to come to terms with that anything that requires us without a constitutional foundation, not to have an election on the 26th of August is actually a violation of that constitution. And we need to come to terms with that and then agree as a people that we are okay to violate the constitution and we are okay to violate a court order. And if we do that, let us also tell ourselves that that violation is not necessarily limited to that court order. It can be to any other court order once we allow the opportunity to violate court orders. Let me say something about the resignation of the member, Dr. Kobe. It's an unfortunate event, and I hear her. As I listen to her in the US radios, and you can sense the weight of this decision. I don't think it was easy. But I think nobody goes into an independent commission in a place like Kenya, in an election commission, who expects it to be for the faint-hearted. Right. This is tough. I served in a constitutional commission for 5 years. I can tell you, anybody who complains there are political divisions is very naive. What do you expect? If people don't agree, what do you expect? I can tell you, Anne, when I was in the CIC, it was in a hot political time. Right. We used to argue sometimes until 4 in the morning. My fellow colleagues will tell you. And the only two things we agreed, however much we disagree, the value of the commission as an institution is more important than our views as individuals. So ultimately, whatever it takes for us to have a view as an institution is important because we are doing this for the people. The minute we have people saying, I don't agree with this, I'm uncomfortable with this, I therefore step aside, it is very bad for the institution. It is understandable, and I think we must respect people's views, but I think it is something that denigrates, it's something that diminishes the institution. And it's sad that it had to get there. And I don't know what she was going through to understand it. But I would have said, hang in there. Because there are people who have placed their trust in you. Hang in there, fight in there, try as much as possible. It is actually a failure of leadership from where I sit, that the commission is where it is. The chairman to stand up and say, oh, my people don't agree is a failure of leadership. These are not easy times. These are tough times. Right. When you're given an election to run in a country like Kenya, you don't expect it to be an easy picking, and I'm uncomfortable and unhappy. So I'm just saying that whatever we do, let us recognize we have huge responsibility in the Constitution. Let us try and abide with that Constitution. If we move out of the Constitution, that constitutional void, that constitutional darkness is a very dangerous area. Even if we're going to postpone the election, which for me is neither here nor there, let us find a constitutional foundation for it. If we don't, the danger we go into is more serious than what we are seeing as a constitutional and legal crisis. So for me, the issue of elections 26, election 27, elections December is a detail. Whatever we do, let us ensure we have a constitutional foundation for it. If we don't, we'll head into a crisis.
And we'll talk about whether there is a way through the Constitution to postpone this election. But before that, let me come to you, Dr. Makanda. Kamodho talked about separating legitimacy and legality. From where you sit, is one king over the other?
I do not think that one is king over the other, but however, legality is about rules and as it were. But however, where you are talking about leadership and you're talking about a matter like elections, legitimacy is more critical, because legitimacy dictates acceptability. And since you're dealing with people, and you can't bring what is legal, but if it's not accepted, you assume that those people are not rational enough to deal with what is legal, and so you cannot govern them because they are not accepting. But legitimacy allows what is legal to be accepted, and so they need to go together. But where they are not going together, I think people must withdraw and begin to ask the question of legitimacy, because that is what creates anarchy. That's what leads people to say, we don't want that law, or we disobey that law, and so they begin to despise institutions. They begin to despise what they have set for themselves in terms of law, because you have withdrawn legitimacy. And we do not want to have an election on 27th where some Kenyans will withdraw their feeling that this election is legitimate, this government is legitimate, and so you begin to struggle with acceptability. And we don't want to have an environment like that.
Prof, what do you think about that? And especially if we do go ahead with the election, as I would say largely Jubilee is adamant will happen. The referee seems neither here nor there. Do you think the question of legitimacy and legality will arise, and to you, which is more important given our prevailing circumstances?
You know, Anne, under the prevailing circumstances, both of them make sense. But what my brother Kamoto raised is critical, that nobody's breaking the law by holding the election on next Thursday. Because legally, I have seen a lot of people attribute the question of having elections within 60 days to the declaration by the Supreme Court. I think you are giving the Supreme Court a lot of power it doesn't have. And that declaration was just reiterating what is in Article 140 of the Constitution. So it is not a declaration of the Supreme Court. I think what the Supreme Court should be given, credit should be given to the Supreme Court with regard to the fact that it says there were irregularities. So that is the first correction, that legally, even if the Supreme Court had just nullified the election without saying anything else,
it was obvious.
It was obvious under Article 40 that we would go for an election. So holding the elections within 60 days is legally and constitutionally correct. That is the correct position. But the problems that we are having right now go beyond just the constitutional order. Certain political problems have arisen in the process. As the contest goes on, there are more political problems which now raise questions of legitimacy. And yet, if we just say we want to apply the legal position, we don't deal with the political problem. So that forces us to combine both the legal and the question of legitimacy to come out of this. Now, there are people who will say that in terms of legitimacy, if we hold the election on Thursday next week, then that lays the first step towards now we have dealt with the legal part, so we start dealing with the question of legitimacy. But there are others who say that no, if we do that, we actually interfere with our struggle to acquire legitimacy. So what does it tell us? It tells us that as a country, we need to think over it. You can't dismiss any of them and say, where is the middle ground? In fact, as we sit on this national television, therefore we say, there is no need of saying one is better than the other. We think we must respect this constitution, but we also want to have the leadership of this country from the bottom of from an MCA, anybody, to enjoy recognition across the country. So in that case, we are put in a position where we can balance the two. So they are equally important, and the solution comes by first recognizing the fact that let nobody condemn the fact that what we are going to do on Thursday is illegal. There is no illegality, and you cannot argue in a court of law and say this election is illegal. But you must know that even if it is not illegal, it cannot solve the political problems we have.
That's true. And in fact, for me, that actually, Anne, is the issue. Because if you look at even the contested issues, and the problem with Kenyans is sometimes we don't like to accept facts. If you look at the reason why NASA, for example, will not participate, or at least they say they will not participate in the election, it is comprised in a document called the 11 irreducible minimums. They are actually about 30 if you break them down. If you read those irreducible minimums, because they're grouped in various headings, if you read those irreducible, they're actually very reasonable requests, because they actually help us produce a credible election, which is good for everybody. It's not just good for NASA. Many of those, actually I would say maybe 70–80% of them have been accepted by the Commission. The Commission has said on the remaining ones, this is why it is impossible for us to. Some of those explanations are reasonable, some of them are doubtful. But the truth of the matter is, there is a conversation that has been ongoing. My concern is that before we go to the question of boycott because of the legitimacy question, you need to be able to show that, because boycott of an election has huge implications, and especially if it's a forced boycott also, you know, where you're forcing people not to vote. You're not doing like Matiba in 97 of people shouldn't go. By the time you reach that, you also need to show there is a matter of politics. You have done all that is possible and it has failed. For as long as there's any opportunity to resolve some issues, I think we owe it to the country to do that which the law requires. I'm a complete believer in the legitimacy. The problem with the legitimacy, it's also a moving target, and it's very subjective. You know, when the election is held on, to who will it not be legitimate? You know, so it's a very moving target and it's very subjective. So while it is an important consideration, and it must be an important consideration for every leader, it is very risky to hang everything on it, because then it might not enable you to move ahead. I would rather go what the Prof says, that however credible this election is, even if we import people from heaven to come and run it with wings and ensure nothing goes wrong, I can guarantee you there are fundamental issues, underlying issues, which an election will not resolve. The problem in this country is we are pretending that the contest we have is about from 34 or serial numbers or watermarks. It is not. Even if we resolve watermarks and serial numbers and everything, that which is dividing us so strongly that people are willing to get shot is one thing, is that we have delegitimate. The way we have constructed our constitutional architecture is such that it's very much a winner-take-all. If you lose an election in this country, you have the undivided loyalty of millions of people, 6-7 million people. But after the election, we tell you, thank you very much, it was nice knowing you. In fact, we kick you on the backside and tell you go. Let me finish, Barack. Let me finish, Barack. The problem with that is that because people attach their political fortunes on individuals in this country, it then says to those people, you're not legitimate. Now, that is not about power sharing or anything, because power sharing means elections have no consequences. But it's to say, and it's not about Raila Odinga and the opposition. We're talking about even the future of this country, because there will be other people in opposition. In 1990, when did it that Uhuru Kenyatta accepted the election? It is because after that he went and became the leader of the opposition, and he maintained his political profile. The problem here is that we tell people, you live, and constitutionally you have no voice, you have no profile, you have no funding, you have no access to anything. If we don't resolve some of those issues, we can continue pretending this is about from 30-something. We know it is not.
Okay, Barack.
Yes, I've listened, and I recognize that the conversation is highly academic, maybe because of the academic heavyweights that
I'm not an academic
that we have here. And my good friend Kamodho Eganjo is, of course, being diversionary. Chairman Chebukati himself raised 12 issues. These 12 issues are issues of fundamental concern. That his own name and password was used close to 10,000 times. That certain equipment was switched off 3 days before the election day. What happened? That certain forms and results did not arrive where they were supposed to be at the right time. That about 11,000 forms 34A were not taken into account, and so on and so forth. The Supreme Court has talked about irregularities and illegalities, and I take a judicial note that the expression illegalities has been conveniently dropped in most of the conversations that I've been hearing about. It's been irregularities. Don't we need answers to these questions for people to be satisfied that that which made us to have an election that was invalidated has been addressed? No, you've been talking too much. We have waited patiently and listened to you. You must learn to listen also. Yeah. So,
thank you, Barack.
Yeah, well, most welcome. So that we have got a situation here where we are confronted with the possibility that we are walking through certain motions of legalisms. And these motions of legalisms are going to give us a product that we cannot accept. Here is a context where the Supreme Court, having listened to both sides of the arguments, has made a decision which is legitimate, and one side comes out and starts saying, oh, Maraga na wakora wake. You have delegitimized the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, went through legal processes and gave you a legal verdict. And so you begin that confrontation from that point, and therefore you destroy the environment in which people would have come together to say, ladies and gentlemen, what went wrong? Can we address what went wrong?
And so we need those answers. And I suppose IEBC in itself should equally be the institution to give us the answer to that, to say, because this is what went wrong, then this is how we can assure you it won't happen again. But let me ask you this, Barak. So if we go into the election without those answers, as IEBC and Jubilee would have it, what do you believe the overall consequence will be? I know we've talked about the legitimacy part, but what else do you see happening?
The overall consequence is going to be this, and I know that on Thursday there's going to be an exercise that is going to be called an election, and President Kenyatta is going to get about 99%, like Pierre Nkurunziza of Burundi got about 99%. But will that 99% be legitimate? Will the product, the outcome of a process that lacks legitimacy, can it be legitimate? Can he form a government that we can look at as Kenyans and say, this is our government, it's a legitimate government? Of course he will say, we went to the election according to the law, people turned out, those who wanted to turn out, they voted, we got the majority of the votes. In fact, it's an overwhelming victory. We have got 99%. And so we are going to be inaugurated on such and such a day. Is it a legitimate government?
All right.
Will he sit wherever he's sitting and be comfortable and say, I'm legitimately the president of the people of Kenya?
All right, Dr. Makanda, let me ask you this. The statement by the chairman of the IEBC, the National Returning Officer, painted a picture of helplessness on one hand, and also there was the threat of, quitting. If he does so, will we be in an unprecedented crisis, or do you believe it will inadvertently force the president's hand to sign the electoral amendments, which he hasn't up to now?
I do think that the statement of the chairman of the IEBC, since he had set a tone as though he was actually going to quit, I felt that he edited his statement at the end and moved back to IEBC after he had prepared us that he was moving out. But he prescribed a political solution to the problem that he raised. He didn't prescribe a legal solution. And so since he, as a lawyer, holding a constitutional office, felt that the solution to the problem that he described is political, I think then the question that we're talking about here about legitimacy becomes a critical question, because he felt we have done our best. Technically and in terms of preparation, we are able to deliver an election. But however, he said the environment within which we are operating does not enable this commission to promise a credible process and an acceptable process to the people of Kenya. And because of that, he says, I'm calling for a meeting of these two people to come and sit with me, and we sit and agree and propose a solution. And so going by that prescription of the chairman, then for me, it appears that he appreciates the magnitude of the problem, and the problem that he put his fingers on is a political problem.
But would resignation lead to a crisis? Would it lead to the signing of the electoral amendments? What's your own hypothesis?
I do not think that his resignation will lead us to a crisis, because we have mechanisms of dealing with situations where people resign. So I do not think that will lead us to a crisis. It will only lead us to a crisis if people refuse to sit down and find a solution. But I think we can sit together and find a solution.
Okay.
But however, allow me to pick up something that Kamodo had raised that I think Barak was alluding to and was saying it was diversionary. I think it's important to appreciate that the reason why elections in Kenya, and particularly after 2013, elections in Kenya has become a very animated thing, is because the constitution of this country only prescribes two political positions in the executive. And so because of that, Kenyans who feel we want to be part of government, they feel actually isolated and left out. And because they feel left out in that manner, the levels of hatred, the levels of emotions, the levels of political competition has been heightened to levels that we did not experience before this new constitution. But also, on the converse, the leader of opposition, who should be the official leader of opposition, becomes a citizen once he loses an election. And that by itself allows that person, that fella, not to engage Kenyans formally as a leader of official opposition, but as a civilian. And so he goes on the streets. And so it makes the environment within which we are operating and doing government very difficult for this country. And I think for Kamotho to have raised a matter like that, and he was sitting in CIC, I think it's something that we must begin to ask ourselves. We go into this election, yes, but we must begin to ask ourselves, have we prescribed for ourselves solutions that are sufficient for this country, or are there things that we need to begin to consider going forward in
post an election?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, Prof, I'm sure you'll want to respond to this, but I really do hope you'll move us forward, because earlier, Kamotho talked about finding a constitution. If October 26th is not to happen, then it can't be that we've just sort of decided to operate outside of the law without some sort of constitutional process taking us there. One of the things that has emerged is that Chairman Chebukati had the proposal of going to court about this matter, saying that, look, we've done everything that we can technically, but politically it appears unsuitable to have an election. That he's appeared to have been outvoted on that. But do you think that would have been a reasonable solution? Should IEBC be going back to the Supreme Court to say we've done what we can do? An election doesn't seem politically viable. Can this date be moved forward past 60 days?
I think it's just a question of being desperate, because the reason is the Supreme Court has its work cut out. It's not supposed to engage in negotiations. The Supreme Court is supposed to rule over legal matters. But when we are unable to resolve our conflicts through legal matters, even this constitution gives us alternative means of sorting out our differences. So in my opinion, that is just a question of desperation, and I should even mention...
Is it a desperate time?
He's desperate because probably he is part of the
I'm asking, is it a desperate time? Is the Republic facing
time? It is desperate because
Mm-hmm.
the major combatants in this election are unable to sit together and talk. So, but the IEBC has become collateral damage. You know, it is suffering collateral damage. But everybody is saying that the problem is IEBC. I differ. The problem is not IEBC. It might be part of the problem, but the problem is bigger than that. You know, my father has just, Dr. Makanda has just said, he said that he's blaming the Constitution. My brother Kamotho also alluded to that. I differ with them with a lot of respect. We have had very emotive elections even in the 1990s. 2007, we didn't have this constitution. So we can't just blame this constitution, although it might have heightened something. But there are other issues. Why is elections, even before this constitution dispensation, why are elections a matter of life and death? Where people can't accept. Even if you made this constitution work by making sure that you make sure that as the papers are being printed, all the presidential candidates are watching. And then they go home with those papers and then come back and count in the morning and they distribute to their supporters. There will be a problem.
Yes.
So the problem is, and we are saying that in the circumstances, we need a dialogue, a national dialogue on how we can proceed. Even after the elections of Thursday, we are already agreed they won't solve the political problem. And yet the political problem is the one which is simmering. But they are using legal means to promote this political problem. So we are saying, look, Chebukati, the same person Chebukati who went to court, you see the desperation. he ended up now calling for Jubilee and the NASA meeting. That just shows that he knows legally it will not work. There could be a series of litigations from next week after the election, people saying they are not satisfied with one or two things. But that one is taking nowhere. Some of the lawyers will become rich by these litigations. They are ready. In fact, they might enjoy this process.
That's all this litigation has done.
Yes, but Anne, my proposal is that there is nothing impossible in this matter. If you call these teams together to sit down alongside other people and we say, what is ailing us? There is another issue that, in addition to what my brother Waiganjo said, it's not just the sharing of power and the fact that you take people who have gotten a lot of votes to just become ordinary citizens, condemn them that. There is an issue, the ethnic issue in Kenya. People seem to define everything in terms of ethnicity. You know, even going to the toilets is defined in the same way. They will tell you, you went to the toilet, and when I went in the toilet, I found it was a bit dirty. Then we know who was there. And it takes an ethnic angle. So if we deal with this and say, how best can we coexist? I don't think we have found an answer on how we can negotiate through our ethnic diversity. That has not been found.
Fair enough, Prof. And I don't want us to go too much into it, but I think there's general consensus in the country. I think everybody knows that we are fighting about more than just, you know, this current election, and this can only then be, but this is the, you know, the immediate issue before us that can only be dealt with after the election. But I want us to conclude, because we're absolutely out of time, quickly on the note of security, and just 2 or 3 pointers on that. And Barak, kick us off, because you've already held that you do not believe that it's politically viable to have an election on 26th. Be that as it may, you would agree that it would not be an illegal exercise. It would be what the law prescribes, correct? Yeah,
when you look at the clock of legalism,
yes. Okay, it would be legal. I want to get to my question. One of the presidential candidates in this contest, Ekuru Aukot, yesterday on GKL said that the president should move to Parliament to get permission for the military to be deployed internally for the purposes of safeguarding this election, ensuring that IEBC can do its work, that those who want to vote can go ahead and vote in a secure environment. What do you think of that?
You see, Aukot is my friend, and I've got a lot of respect for him. But we are hearing very confounding things from people we have had a lot of respect for, especially lawyers. Some of the things they are saying are extremely confounding, because when you mobilize the military, then you are having martial law. It means that the atmosphere is completely wrong, it is untenable, and that we cannot have a legitimate election within this kind of arrangement. There's no need for the president to go to Parliament to seek that kind of mandate, because if he did so, that would delegitimize the election even further. And I said a little earlier that we seem to be going the Burundi way, because that is what Pierre Nkurunziza does when he wants to give himself extra time in the presidency. And I do hope that this country does not find itself going that way. I think on Thursday next week, we are going to go through the motions of an election. There are people who, of course, will stay away. There are going to be some demonstrations, peaceful ones, I hope. And that after that, somebody will be declared president-elect. I expect it's going to be President Uhuru Kenyatta. And of course, the matter will end up in a matter of days before the Supreme Court. And you have seen that the referees themselves have indicated that they don't believe that they can give us a credible election. And so it can only be expected that a few days after that, we are going to have that election invalidated again, and we're going to find ourselves being sent back to 60 days. And President Kenyatta will again be talking about Maraga na wakora wake, and Deputy President William Ruto will be, of course, exploding as usual. And we are going to remain in this circus for a long time. If the IEBC itself could do the right thing, the country would move forward. If the Supreme Court can do the right thing, IEBC can do so. When we talk about IEBC is not Ezra Chiloba, for example. Ezra Chiloba and others, whom even the chairman himself has said that there are people here whom, as chairman, I have no confidence in. They should disengage. He's asking them to resign, and yet they cannot resign. Who is it that is keeping them there? Why is it that when Jubilee and Chiloba speak about these things, they sound like two sides of the same coin?
So you're saying the chairman should go ahead and either suspend or sack?
If he sucks, and I think atanyoroshwa.
I don't know what that means.
And here is the reality. I think there are very many positions articulated about individuals. You know, the reality is that in this country, we have equated accusations to guilt, and I think it's very unfortunate. These matters have been taken to that same court. On people like Chiloba, the court has made a determination. I think we either believe in the law or we don't. But let me talk about the question of violence on Thursday. The right to boycott an election is a constitutional right. No one can force you to take part in an election. What is illegal is if you stop somebody from exercising their democratic right. For people to be stopping people even from training. I mean, hello, these are people looking for income for their children. For you to stop them even to be trained is absolutely unacceptable. So let us allow people who want to vote. Now, this is what the law says, by the way, and I think it's important for Kenyans to know. There's a section called Section 255B, which if you allow me to read very quickly, it says the commission, the IEBC, may, where a date has been appointed for holding an election, postpone the election in a constituency, in a ward, or in a county where there is reason to believe that a serious breach of the peace may occur. Or where there's been such occurrence of electoral malpractice that it is not possible to have an election. The commission is allowed to postpone the election and to have it at another time. This is, however, what the law, that same law says. That if, however, at the end of the election, it is clear that the effect of holding that election would not have an effect on the overall result, then you can still announce the final result. What does that mean? That if we have pockets of people who refuse to vote or stop people from voting, and the commission decides to cancel an election, the election will go on. And if the number of voters in those areas are not sufficient to change the overall result, an election will be declared validly. Now, does that mean we answer the question of legitimacy? No. I think my point is we need to move to legitimacy through a legal process. Once we have a legal process, then let us answer the very real questions about legitimacy. If you conflate the two, we'll never move anywhere. So my view is that let us try as much as possible to avoid violence. Let us allow those who want to vote. Then after that, the government has whoever wins the election has a huge responsibility to answer the question of how do we ensure we don't go back. And there are 20 possible answers to that question. It is not just one. I have thrown one on the table. I'm sure there are others.
I want to come round for a final round of comments, but as you kick us off, Dr. Makanda, I mean, the president has called for national prayers, assuming God gives us audience. What should the nation be praying about? What should we be saying?
Allow me to give an example that I've been told of. That there was a clergy in this city at St. Paul's Chapel in the 80s, and he was holding prayers. It was a Sunday service, and it happened that the President of the Republic came, and he asked for people to write down prayer requests, and people wrote down prayer requests so that they would be taken to God in prayer. But one of those prayer requests was to ask that let's pray that Koigi and other detainees may be released.
Wow.
This priest did not take that prayer to God. He took that request to the president who was seated and said, this one belongs to the president, because we do not have to bother God if the president is here with this type of prayer. And so I do think that prayer is important. We should go and pray. But part of the things that we'll be seeking to pray, the president can help us resolve most of those things.
For instance?
I mean, the president sitting and talking with Honorable Raila and saying, this country is greater than you, my brother, and myself. What is it that we must do to preserve this country? So that then the situation that Okuru Okot is anticipating to militarize a democratic process, then it ceases to be a democratic process. If we release the military in a democratic process, then it fails to function as a democratic process. And so if the president actually sat with his colleague, they mean well for this country, but they are not communicating that. And we would like to appeal to them. We will pray that God changes their minds and their hearts and bring them to converse. Yes, we shall pray. But I do think that the two of them hold the key to the problem that we are struggling with. If the president and Honorable Raila accepted to sit together, it might take 30 minutes, it might take 1 hour, it might take 2 hours, 3 hours. They can leave that room, that sitting, with the solution that protects Kenya. The posterity of this country is far greater than staying apart and aloof from each other and just inciting people, because the followers of the president are hardening their positions, the followers of Honorable Raila are hardening their position, but yet if these two accepted, our prayers would be much more acceptable before God than what we are doing now.
The things for God to do, there are things that are in our hands to do, I suppose is what I'm hearing you.
That's what I'm saying.
You say, Barak, your final thoughts, briefly. Oh, Prof, I beg your pardon, Prof. I've looked over you for a bit.
Yes. What I think, what Dr. Makanda is saying is true. Just quickly, the first thing is that when you think that you are no longer useful in what you are doing to the Republic, you should quit, because so I think for Akombe, Dr. Akombe, we have done debate together here. Probably she thought she was not contributing much. So I don't think people should read so much into that. They just understand she couldn't take the pressure and she goes away. You don't need even to associate her with any wing. She made a decision. Secondly, if you look at I am really restraining myself, and because I'm kind of in a foul mood. Since the reason is that we need to do something about ourselves. We need to change our thinking. I think 1 week to this election, we need to do things differently, because the blame game should stop. Whether who did what and who did not do what. This blame game has been on for too long, but we have lost the greater good. The greater good being that we can resolve our problems without mentioning the military. We can resolve our problems without bringing in the police. We haven't exhausted all our options to make this country better. Quarreling the way we are quarreling is not extremely out of order. People have to quarrel. If you go to the United States of America, they still talk about in order to make a more perfect union. This is what they do. Part of the process of building a democracy in this country to create a more perfect union is to quarrel. But we must reach a point where we say that we have quarreled enough, each one has made their point, now let's look for a solution. So my position is that the president and anybody, including the church, because he represents the church here, it's not too late to talk about this. We can talk about it. We shall get a solution to our country. The desperation people are having are just out of order. I don't think we are going to deteriorate beyond this point. We have reached a point where we need to advise our people to stop now blaming everybody. We are all responsible. It's not Jubilee, it's not NASA. We are all responsible for this mess that we are in. We must solve this mess while thinking about our country, that this is the only home we have. And whichever solution we look for should not aggravate the already deteriorating situation. So, I still appeal to the president, because he's our president, to find it in his own thinking that it is the right thing to do, to initiate talks with everybody so that they solve the problem. And those who are going to vote on Thursday, nobody should stop them, because it is illegal to stop anybody from doing what they want. Those who want to keep out of the election, again, nobody should punish them. That is the law, but not to say we are going to threaten anybody. Polling officers should not be threatened, because the rule of law does not allow us to degenerate to the level of savages. We cannot accept that.
No, very briefly.
Yes,
will you pray on Sunday, Barack?
I pray every day. I'm a Christian gentleman, but this country confounds me. You find like President Kenyatta, there are two presidents Kenyatta, the one in designer suit in State House, and the one in Jubilee colors on the campaign trail. One is a perfect gentleman who says very rational things, such as he said yesterday about prayers, about peace. Then the other one is a name-calling president who talks about mtu wa vitendawili, yule mchawi, yule mgoroki, and that kind of thing. And then the next day, he's appealing for peace and order. And there is need to harmonize those two aspects of President Kenyatta. As a people, we confound God. As Dr. Makanda has told us, there are things which God has already given us solutions. And when we are going back to him for prayers, he really wonders what more we would like. If we were able to obey the institutions, to do the right things, to agree when there's a problem, such as when we came out of the Supreme Court, if we could only have sat together and said, so what is the problem? There was a problem with the ballot papers, let us address them. There was a problem with the systems, the ICT systems, let us address them. But you cannot be going around the country saying, Chiloba kaa ngumu, and then you are expecting these people to accept all these and that there's going to be peace and harmony. On Thursday, I think nobody is going to stop anybody from voting. Those who want to vote, they'll go out and vote. Let them go out and vote. However, that will not be an election, because an election must meet certain standards, certain qualities. It must pass the litmus test of democracy. So when we say there will be no election, that is not saying that people will not go out to vote or anybody is going to stop them. They will go out, they will vote. But that exercise, when it's placed on the weighing scales, will not be an election. It will be invalidated by the Supreme Court again, and we will end up right where we are.
I think praying we must. I'm a great believer in prayer, and I think we pray in times of crisis, and there is no crisis. But I think the one thing we need to come to terms with as Kenyans is that we committed ourselves to a constitution, and that whatever we do, let us not accept, let us not legitimize violation of the constitution and say it's okay because the constitution is not convenient now. Because if we do that, we allow everybody. Let's not assume that this is then allowed only in these circumstances. We're basically saying that anytime the constitution is inconvenient and we need to answer questions of legitimacy and rightness and views, we will go outside the constitution. That is a very dangerous route. The other point to say is that the sort of trends we have seen with regard to the electoral officials worries me about what might happen on election day. Barack may have a lot of faith in the way people will behave, but from what I have seen, even from leaders who are physically stopping and ejecting people who are just being trained, worries me about that day. And I think it's important that we tell our leadership that if you believe you have a legitimate point, then allow the other person also to express their right. And I think that is important. The final point to say, I think it's important for our leaders to keep talking. And I think part of the responsibility of leadership is sometimes leaders don't even meet to design solutions. It is also that when leaders meet, there is a way in which they lower temperatures, because then you tell your supporters that the stakes are not that high, that there is a conversation we can have. Because if leaders are not talking, how do you expect their subjects to be talking? So in a sense, there is a place for that. But even if those leaders talk, it shouldn't be so as to agree to violate the constitution. Because when this constitution fails, where then do we go? So I think my point would be that whatever we do, whatever we're going to do, let us find foundation for it in the constitution. And if the constitution is inconvenient for now, the election may be invalidated, but it will be invalidated within the constitutional framework. We'll come back, and that is a better process than saying now it has become a problem, let's set it aside. But for me, I'm a great believer in the hope for this country. We will come out of this somehow, and we'll come out of it stronger. I have to believe that.
Right, and I thank you all, and I certainly appreciate that, you know, we have a diverse audience. Not everybody believes, not everybody's spiritual, not everybody believes in the concept of prayer, etc. But I suppose because that is what we were talking about, then if only on a poetic note, if that is all it would be, let me end with this. Joel 2:13, rend your heart and not your garment. Return to the Lord your God. I suppose echoing what you were saying, that it cannot just be an exercise. Oh, look at us, we're praying, but maybe needs to go a little deeper. Poetic license for you. Thanks for watching tonight. I'm Angie Guta.
I thought you were going to pray for us.
I just might. That's where this republic is headed. I thank you all for watching. Have a good night. Thank you so much for your views.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it very much.
Yeah.